So once we see the impacts of COVID really start to subside, people get back to a little bit of a more normal work life, I would expect some of the share of spend that might have been shifted to goods from services probably shift back a little bit. But the only other real unknown is, in my point of view, is the huge increase in e-commerce shipping, is whether or not that continues or whether there's a return back to brick and mortar. And that would really impact the level of inventory that shippers determine to keep on hand. If e-commerce shipping and demand remain high, then shippers are going to start holding greater levels of inventory at greater DC locations, which is going to require more import volume to support it. If e-commerce demand slips back to pre-COVID levels, I would expect more muted second, third, and fourth quarter next year than we had this year. So for next year's holiday season, I would probably expect it to start earlier than we typically have seen in the past and finish later. I don't think that shippers have the risk tolerance that they may have had previously to run a more just-in-time inventory system. I think they want to make sure inventory is on hand. It makes its way through the port complex with enough time to get transloaded through the DC network and into stores or onto shelves as quickly as it can. And so because of a lot of the constraints that we had this year with congestion in the ports, I would expect a little bit more of a risk-averse shipping strategy next year, where peak season probably starts a little bit earlier, doesn't have quite as sharp of a peak, and probably plateaus a little bit and stays busier longer than we typically have seen in years past. One of the big debates within the drayage community that was somewhat put on hold in 2020 just due to trying to cope with COVID and the pandemic and keeping up with volumes, but I would expect to be brought back to the forefront in 2021 is the issue around misclassification and whether or not the driver base that supports the drayage community should be classified as owner-operators or employees. And at NFI, we feel very strongly that we want to support any operating model that the driver chooses. So we operate an owner-operator model, we operate a licensed motor carrier model, and we operate an employee model, all within our drayage operation. And we feel very strongly that drivers should have the right to choose what kind of driver they want to be, whether or not they want to be their own boss and operate as an owner-operator or as a licensed motor carrier, or if they want to choose to be an employee and drive an NFI blue truck. So we provide all those options to the drayage driver base, and we fully intend to support the right for drivers to choose. We expect that conversation to continue in 2021, and we feel like we are really well positioned to support shippers regardless of how the driver classification debate shakes out through the court system. And because of the flexibility that we offer, we think we're really well positioned to support any operating model regardless of what drivers choose to be. The other item that I could see getting impacted would be the equipment types that support the industry. So a lot of these owner-operators have, they own their own truck. In certain states, there have been pushes towards, encouraging or in some cases requiring either alternative fuels or lower emission diesel engines. And I could see the new administration, putting incentives or requirements in place on a more national scale to start accelerating the transition away from diesel to either electric or natural gas equipment within the drayage community. Whether it's diesel, electric, natural gas, that are starting to become a little bit more prevalent and available more on a pilot basis right now as fleets are starting to test out new technologies and understand what works for them. And NFI really has been a leader in that space. We operate natural gas trucks, we operate electric trucks within our drayage fleets right now. And we really want to make sure that we are on the forefront of proving out that these technologies work and how they might support our business. And we really feel like drayage is probably the best application, particularly for electric to begin, because of the short length of haul, the round trip nature of the business. We've invested not just in the trucks, but in the charging infrastructure as well. And we really want to be positioned as a leader in electrification and trucking. We feel like drayage is the best opportunity to do that. Shippers need to take a really hard look at the marine terminals where they bring their freight in. In many cases, they're focused mostly on transit time from overseas and what the expectation might be for lead time for the freight to work its way across the ocean, through the import supply chain, through their DC network and into stores. But in many cases, because of unexpected congestion at certain terminals, that throws that lead time way out of whack. And I think that by looking at the efficiency of the marine terminals might change the analysis for them a little bit, and potentially accepting a little bit of a longer transit to the East Coast, but with more predictable availability of the containers and transport, off port and into the warehouse network. I think they might be able to get better lead time visibility on the inventory that they're bringing into their system, rather than being so focused on a perfect transit time from Asia. So I think looking at options and taking into account the real world application of how quickly the process or slowly the process takes is really important to understand as they look at their import strategy going into 2021 and beyond. Because of the scale that we have in operating in over 15 marine terminals and inland ports across the country, we have a really good boots on the ground feel for the varying levels of efficiency of different port complexes and inland ports. And in many cases, we welcome the opportunity to work with shippers to help develop a strategy on where it makes sense to bring their freight into, which terminals tend to operate more efficiently than others, which steamship lines we have the best relationships with, what expected transit times may look like, where there's transload capacity, what the drayage capacity looks like in different markets. And so we can really help think through some of those real world decisions with shippers, so that they can really help understand and go in with an eyes wide open view as they make decisions on where they want to bring their freight into. There's two primary focus areas. One is a continued investment into our technological ecosystem. The transportation industry in general tends to be somewhat of a late adopter of technology, and then within transportation, drayage tends to be the last adopter of technology, and we really see that as an opportunity to separate ourselves. So we're making big investments into our transportation management systems, our GPS systems, not just within the trucks, but on the chassis as well, our business intelligence tools. We really want to make sure that we're providing as much real-time visibility to our customers as possible into their import supply chain, which typically tends to be a bit of a black hole from a data standpoint, because you have different stakeholders, whether it be the steamship lines, the marine terminals, the chassis providers, the drayage company. We want to try to cut through a lot of that noise, where a lot of the data points may be somewhat fragmented. We're really working on trying to build a technological ecosystem that consolidates all of that information into a single view for our customers to have better access to information, to help them make better, faster decisions when it comes to their import or export freight. I think the other one is really just trying to build up our capacity, not just in our employee trucks, our owner-operator trucks, but our partner carriers as well. We want to build up a fleet to the point where we never are in a position to say no to a customer. We always are able to source a truck and find the capacity to meet the customer's needs. Because the one thing that we've learned is this year is that demand requirements can be very unexpected, and whether it's finding the truck, finding the chassis, we want to make sure that we're in a position to service all of our customers regardless of what's going on in the environment. And so building up the capacity in order to do that is a real big focus of ours going into next year.